If you'd like to participate in the discussion or leave us feedback, you can contact us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. If you like the content and want to hear more of the show, subscribing will ensure you don't miss an episode. New episodes come out almost every Wednesday. Also, please review, tell a friend about the podcast, or share with your gaming group. Now sit back and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Level Up Your Gaming Podcast. My name is Aaron, and joining me today I've got Josh, as always, and we have our good friend Ken. Ken, how are you doing today?
Doing well, and yourself, my brother?
I'm doing good. We have you on for this we tried this little podcast a while ago. We had some technical difficulties. We're back. Yes. We've got it figured out.
Yes, but in hindsight, it was kind of a blessing because I had the completely wrong idea of what I was trying to convey in that moment. Initially, I was having a conversation with our friend Tom, and Tom is a film student and an avid Pixar and Disney fan. We got on the topic of a kind of like almost Disney conspiracy theory where part of the running theme of recent Pixar movies, or excuse, I'm not using the terminology correctly, but the 3D animated movies was Inside Out, right? And they have these like, what if blah, blah, blah had feelings? They did it with cars. They did it with all sorts of crazy things. And then they finally got to what if feelings had feelings, and that was Inside Out. But the analysis of the situation was, what if Joy is actually the main antagonist or the villain of this piece? Because she displays some arguably villainous, but definitely some antagonistic behavior. Seems to be rather self-centered, very immoving in her opinion on how things should be run. But looking back on it, I was completely wrong about most of the perspectives that I had about the film, and it really got me to question, like, what is the actual difference between a villain and an antagonist?
And that is our topic today.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's a very interesting topic to get into, because if you are telling a story, if you're putting together a story, there really is a difference between villains and antagonists, and you can have a lot of fun with players who are always going to be the protagonist in the story, because the protagonist is the one that drives the action. But you can have fun with protagonists that are evil, or just heading off into bad directions by not facing them off with villains who they may, hey, he's got a great idea, we should kill all the elves. Versus an antagonist, which is something different. So really, I think let's start with definitions. What are these three things? And then let's move into, like, how can we use them? What's the difference? So, like I said, I'll start with protagonist. It's the one that drives the story. It's the one that does all the action. Those are going to be your players. Those are when you're watching a movie, that's usually the main character. I can understand where in Inside Out that you could consider Joy not as the main character, even though she drives the majority of the story, but she is just a subset of the girl that she exists within, which is Riley. Oh my God, I can't believe this is having all the kids. I know all of these movies now. But yeah, if you wanted to argue that Riley was the main character, because they all exist within Riley, blah, 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 that Joy would be an antagonist to Riley. Because what is an antagonist?
Antagonist.
Well, yeah, so I mean,
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say as I was thinking of this topic, and I don't know if I want to give the TLDR on all this here. I was like, okay, villain versus antagonist. Okay, I see the point here, and I mean, in playing, your villain is always going to be an antagonist. Okay, it is always the villain is a subset of the antagonist, and so it's always going to exist that they will be coinciding together. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're the only antagonist within your story, but your villain is always going to be probably the primary antagonist within your story. So your antagonist is going to be the people who are anti to the protagonist. They're going to be there to put roadblocks in front of the protagonist, not necessarily in a malicious way as though the villains probably would, or in a way that is trying to actively thwart the characters. Your other players within the group can be antagonists to different players within the party itself. They are putting blocks in front of your other players, intentionally or unintentionally, but they are anti to what the players are trying to accomplish.
Exactly.
I'd like to argue against your point, Aaron. I don't think that the villain needs to be an antagonist. The villain doesn't need to be directly opposed to the player in a sense that they are actively fighting the player and the player is actively fighting the villain. You can have a villain who is completely unaware of and does not interact with the main character, the protagonist, at all. They have a plan that they are going through and they are fulfilling, and the protagonist is there to maybe they are fighting the villain, but the villain is unaware of the protagonist the entire time. And I will give you an example.
And I got a follow-up example.
I was going to say, I'm going to counter your thing, but I'll let you give me the example.
The Fifth Element. In the Fifth Element, Zorg and the giant evil moon thing, they are...
If you've never seen The Fifth Element, shame on you. Fast forward 5 minutes.
I mean, no, just pause right now.
No apologies for spoilers for a movie that came out in the 90s.
Yes. We ruined a 20-year-old movie.
That's what we do every week. Come on. If I am not referencing
with Val Kilmer,
if I'm not referencing movies that I grew up with in any of my games, something has gone wrong. But those characters, those villains, they've got a villainous thing that they're doing, and they are fighting the Galactic Council, and so they're antagonists to the Galactic Council. But the main character is performing his actions to sort of stop the thing. He is not being thwarted by the main villain. He is being thwarted by everything else around him. And he is not the villain. Zorg and the evil thing are not actively going after this guy. He just keeps running into their minions or their problems or the things that they're working to get done. So you don't need to have an antagonist villain. You can just have a villain who has a plan and is going to do a thing, and the players are just like, well, we can't have that, and the villain never knows why things aren't working until maybe the very end.
Yep.
Well, contra to that, though, that is when the villain always becomes an antagonist at some point.
Well, I mean, Zorg blew up before he got the chance to. So
I think there's a distinction to be made between a villain who is displaying antagonistic behavior and the antagonist of the main plot.
That's the other
that's a very
argument.
Important distinction.
So you can have an antagonist who is not a villain, which
you can have an antagonist who is your protagonist.
Well, I was going to put the horse Brutus from Tangled.
From El Dorado?
No, from Tangled. What's the name of the horse guard from Tangled? Oh, does anybody remember Tangled?
I do. I just don't remember.
I've never seen Tangled.
Okay, let's just talk movies all day. This is you've got the main characters, one of which is a thief and not a good guy, and the other is escape, blah, 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 blah. And the antagonist to these protagonists, the main characters, Maximus, there you go, thank you, is a good guy horse that's trying to bring in, this obvious villain who's doing a bad thing. And so you've got an antagonist that the protagonists are sort of trying to thwart, trying to get away from, who is not at any way a villain. So you can use this villain and antagonist sort of dichotomy with your protagonist without having to like strictly say, villains are against the players directly, or antagonists need to be, evil or, have villainous tendencies. You can have villains who have their plans, and you can have antagonists who are directly opposing the players. Yes, there can be overlaps. There should be overlaps in some spots, but that doesn't need to be. And I think defining it that way is going to reduce your options when writing these stories.
Very much so. We got 2 examples for that, and both are from the comics. So you've got your villains who are typically sociopathic, completely lacking in any empathetic connection to either realize or care about any of the harm that they do, and some even reveling in it. Or the antagonist is going to be diametrically opposed to whatever the protagonist is doing. Everything is in motive at that point. Your villain will display antagonistic behavior, but may not necessarily be the antagonist, as Josh pointed out. So for your archetypical villain, you've got the Joker. Some men just want to watch the world burn. And for the antagonist, you have Magneto, who is diametrically opposed to the X-Men. Regardless of motive, he displays compassion, he fights for his people, but they are always in opposition with the X-Men. Until you get into the later issues, but that's different.
Well, I mean, Magneto is one of the special cases where the older, like the further and further we get into reality and seeing his motives, get a child who, a man who is forged by the Holocaust and wants just to have his people be safe. Right. It's kind of hard to make him a villain after a while. So besides that, I think, you can also go with like Constantine. A lot of the demons and stuff like that are trying to take over the world. They're fighting blah, blah, blah. And Constantine is, the main character. He's the protagonist driving the story. But they're not fighting him until he puts himself in their way.
Right.
They are villains with plans.
But you're driving at the very point that I make there at the end, which is that the villain, you can have villains that are not directly antagonistic to your players. I agree with that. Okay. But the moment that your players get in their way, now they are antagonists. They always become an antagonist when your players decide to go fight them. Okay. So the existence of, I don't even know if you could call someone a villain in your game if your players choose not to engage with them. Okay? Because what the world may call them a villain, okay? But if your players don't recognize them as the villain, they're not the villain.
Oh, I just had a great idea for that then. Like, yes, we're going down a very specific rabbit hole here in that when you put 2 people into conflict, they take those roles. Loggerheads. They go against each other. So the only way to avoid that, the only way to have a villain that never becomes an antagonist, is that as soon as the players put themselves in the way, then it stops being the villain and either joins you or stops his villainous ways and realizes what he's done is bad, and now you and him have to go together. I know him.
The penitent archetype.
Yeah, I never knew what I was doing was wrong. Thank you for letting me know. That's the only way you don't get an antagonist out of a villain when you do have that final conflict.
I feel like, in fairness, that's a very, very delicate execution of that kind of.
Yeah, but it could be a fun story. Like we're talking about this specifically because we want to write better stories. We want to be better game masters.
I like the idea of having that you have multiple villains that exist in your world. Like, the crime boss is a villain to somebody. Okay.
Right.
they would recognize him as a villain. Okay. And you can say that in the broader Ken CU or Josh CU, okay, they
Y'all
are
don't want to know about the Ken CU.
the crime boss is a villain in that universe. He has not become antagonistic to you yet because you have not decided to engage with him. So you have a myriad of villains when you start the game, but you're right that they don't necessarily have to start antagonistic, but they will always finish antagonistic unless you do like that switcheroo there at the end, which is like, right. I've seen the error of my way. The moment you engage with that.
It's also an extremely good example of just antagonist behavior by merit of what side of the law you find yourself on. You're a crime boss, you're going to be an antagonist to the authority. You're the authority, you're going to be an antagonist to organized crime, or petty crime, doesn't really matter at that point. Good versus evil, chaos versus law, neutrality versus people who actually give a damn about their character. It's always there's always going to be another side of the coin. Light versus dark, good versus evil, etc., and so forth.
As Josh is highlighting right now, the Emperor and Vader.
So yeah, that was my my thought here is that, you've got the Emperor is obviously a villain, and Vader is obviously an antagonist in the original trilogy. He's going after the players. The players, because
you can use them as the players. If we refer to them as the players for this example.
Absolutely. You heard Mark Hamill talk about his time in Star Wars? That was a role-playing game for him.
I really appreciated his paladin. It was a well done paladin that I didn't hate, like most paladins are. The big fuzzy bard, though, I was just confused by. The fight between Luke and Vader on the Death Star in the last movie, once again spoiling a movie that was the 80s?
70s.
No, the last one was, I think, early 80s.
Was it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
so anyway, oh my God, where was I? So yes, the Emperor at no point is trying to fight Luke until he's trying to get an apprentice. He's trying to get more power and convince somebody to join him. So the villain is not an antagonist to the hero, but Vader is, until Vader sees the error of his ways and then becomes an antagonist to the Emperor. So, I mean, you can have fun with sort of these.
It's how you want to slice and dice your role, because I could say that the Emperor technically becomes more antagonistic to Luke by sending Vader continuously
pitting his father against him.
We can argue semantics over that.
He's his father. Yeah, and that's another part of the villainous behavior at that point. That's sociopathic. He's taking pleasure in pitting father against son, and once again, he's not even willing to sully his hands with that. He's not getting involved. He's just like, you kill him, and it's classic villain behavior, like bad for the sake of being bad.
Yeah. Well, okay, so that's villains and antagonists aside. I think there's a lot of fun to be had in stories that, you've got villains, blah, 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 who cares? But stories that are antagonists who aren't necessarily villains. You can have a party, a group of people that are going out and doing a thing, and there are people that just morally oppose them and get in their way and fight with them. But they may have, they're not necessarily bad guys. They just have a moral standing, or a valid reason, something that the people who are playing your game would say, well, I kind of understand where they're coming from, but I need to do this thing anyway.
Yeah, rivalries, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So those are a very good one. Scorn, deep-seated hatred for someone. You could that typically the villains sometimes portray that, but your antagonist could have it and not be a villain to you. They could just hate you because of who you were, or who you were born to, and
Could be racist.
Well, I mean, that's a villain. That's a straight villain right there. Yeah, I don't care about that. No, but you could have like good people who are, like following the letter of the law. Like, I've been sent to do this thing and I'm supposed to capture you and bring you in for these crimes against the kingdom. I understand that the people I'm working for may be, corrupt or whatnot. But if I don't uphold the law, then we drowned in, in chaos. And, well, I'm trying to fight your bosses because they're ruining the world. Well, I don't know that, blah, 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 blah. So you can have antagonists that aren't necessarily bad guys. And, I think that's a very interesting way to build a story.
Oh, very.
You offer your characters, your players, these moral choices. How do I deal with somebody who I understand where they're coming from, but I have to oppose them?
Yeah, you could have very morally good antagonists who are like the lawmen who, like, to the letter of the city guard who cannot be bribed, the one guy, okay? And who takes a great sense of duty in what he does, and he always upholds the law. Like, that's somebody who can be very antagonistic to your players depending on what they're doing, and also in information gathering could also be very antagonistic to your players, and the fact that you're trying to achieve similar goals. You could be both on the same moral side of the coin, and he will not help you because you are not a city guardsman, and he's taken an oath to the king or whatever. So
he doesn't help you because you're a rogue and a known criminal, and he doesn't help criminals.
Well, yeah, if your players are morally unscrupulous, it's a lot easier for the morally good people to say,
we haven't played
no,
you and I in a while. That's pretty much all I play.
I mean, yeah. You could also just have like, if your players are playing bad characters, you can have other bad characters who, I don't hate you. I don't have villainous plans against you, but you keep taking all the, underworld jobs that I want. So I sort of have to like make sure that your jobs fail, so that I can keep getting
among thieves.
Yeah,
hell yes.
I think that's a fun one too. That's a like rivals. We talked about like a battle of the bands. You've got just like, your group is going out there and doing its thing, and there's just another group that's trying to do the same thing, and you guys keep getting in each other's ways. And it's not that they're evil. I mean, they are evil because they're the other band, but like they're not evil.
They suck to you, but they're not actually evil.
Except for the fact that they're totally evil.
They play light jazz. I just don't trust them.
It's not even actual jazz; it's smooth jazz.
Oh, gross! No, banish them to hell.
Those are good ways that you can create an antagonist that is, everybody in a game that generates the friction from your players getting to point A to point B is an antagonist. Okay, and you're going to generate a lot of them. Okay, the key is to create unique ones. They don't all have to be bad to be, to be interesting people that create problems and create difficulties for your characters.
And I think you remember the God, it was Jared's game when we were doing the investigation game. Which one was the one where he had the sheriff going, "You keep your county business out of my city business," or whatever it was. What game was that?
I don't. I think it was this Mothman game.
Was that Mothman?
Yeah.
God, that was so good. That was so well done.
In a previous game, he had made the law very friendly to us, as though they were sort of, as we've talked in other podcasts, you sort of have to have one group or one person who's sort of the liaison who helps your players along when they get stuck. Like, it's a very good way to avoid friction within your game, especially when your players are trapped. We had typically relied upon, because we were on that side of the moral coin, lawmen and people who who were doing the work that we were aligned with there. But he was so opposed to us in that he's just like, it's like, this is my county, this is my business.
Yeah,
It was so funny.
So well done.
Yeah.
Oh god. But it's that kind of execution that really kind of underscores just how diverse and rich your cast of characters can be by balancing hero, protagonist, antagonist, villain, and even like some of the more difficult to juggle types of characters like anti-heroes or those really charismatic villains and antagonists like your Kaiser Sose as Verbal Kint, as long as we're ruining movies that have been out for decades at this point.
Oh, that's on my list of things to watch. I haven't gotten to that one yet.
You showed me that movie.
Yeah, I think. Well, what you're saying is that in order for, if we're going to have villains and antagonists, and we're going to use them in fun, interesting ways,
Mhm.
what can we do to make them sort of stand out and be interesting characters? They should be memorable. And I think a great way for antagonists to be memorable is to give them a clear reason to be antagonists the players can understand, first of all.
Mhm.
Just like you guys are the players, so I'm fighting you, is fine. And that's real basic. But if you've got a villain that has a plan, an antagonist that doesn't like the players for a specific reason, or is doing a thing for a specific reason, and the players are in the way and are the problem, then you're starting to give legitimacy to the plans of your NPCs, and having reasons why they're doing things allows them to make choices and to interact with your players in memorable, interesting ways. Like you said, you've got the law, the county and the city stuff. They don't want to mix, and the guy doesn't want to be a part of it. It makes sense. You just understand that, and it sticks with you. So what makes an antagonist memorable?
Well, I mean, clearly you're going to be adding something to his personality. The flair, again, this is dressing up your NPCs. So, I mean, this is, giving them, simple motivations, giving them complex motivations, having them convey different personalities to your players, having them, look a certain way, be, again, like you said, if you don't understand why they're in opposition to you, then that you probably need to just do a little bit more to give them that level of flavor text to make the players clear on what's going on or why they're against you. It can't just be, I mean, like even some like if we're gonna go with the murder hobo thing, even some hobo on the street, okay, could become antagonistic to your players when he asks for money and your players say no, and then he starts getting up in your grill in your business. Like, that can become a memorable NPC, and any one of these can become a memorable encounter if if you've given them something unique to do. Now, if you do it with every single, beggar on the street in a D&D game, it's not going to be as memorable. But if it's that one guy who decides to get really, really up in their face and cause all sorts of problems and create a whole scene, then it becomes a very memorable experience. So again, you don't want to I would say not overdo it. Everybody can't be you don't want everybody to be an antagonist, but you do want the ones that are going to be your antagonists, or the people that you're going to have within a scene that you're going to try to overcome, to be the ones that are, they've got a little bit more flavor to them. Okay. And whether that means that you're dressing up your NPCs ahead of time, knowing that what their motivations are, knowing what they kind of tick, what they like, who they don't like, things like that. Those are all going to be things that are going to help you along the way.
Yeah. You're right. I shouldn't be writing complex backstories for every single NPC that my characters may or may not ever encounter. including their entire lineage and their feelings growing up, writing out their dream journals from when they were 5. But
I shift back and forth nervously, throws out several books worth of content.
well, this one shot's over. No, but
won't
like
be able to sleep at night knowing that the one child NPC that that the party will never meet had a bad dream 3 years ago that he's been writing about obsessively.
Yeah, but they never interacted with that child, and he was just drinking coffee in the back room. Why
is a
Ken was
5-year-old
drinking coffee? Because he had a bad dream and he doesn't want to dream it again. Come on, Ken. This is how the story works. But what I'm saying is that if you're going to make a memorable antagonist character that doesn't necessarily be a villain, I mean, we've talked about making bad guys who are interesting bad guys, giving them valid reasons or a valid a plan that they're going to stick with. An antagonist needs to have a legitimate complaint about the characters. Maybe it's the character's actions or motivations that they oppose morally or financially or physically. It's doing something to their land, their people, whatever. They need to be upset by the players' actions, by the way that the players are trying to accomplish their goals. I thought it would be fun to have maybe a villain who is very charismatic and is like leading some people and brainwashing them and turning them into just like angry people against your players. And your players aren't bad people, and the people that they're being attacked by in these towns that they're coming across they're not evil. They just hate you because the villain has already come through and has spun yarns about you.
Yep, the villain has poisoned them against you.
Mm-hmm. So like you've got these uninformed townsfolk that are now antagonists because they don't know any better. And that can be a fun interaction because then you're not, I'm not just going to wander in a town and murder everybody. I need to sort of win them over to my side. Yes, I could just murder everybody. That is an option.
Say, which game?
Like,
KYP.
I always want to give my players the
every
option.
problem looks like a hobo.
Always want to give my players the option.
Each
I
one
know
of
what
these
they're
people
going to
looks
choose.
like 3 XP to me.
He's got
Long,
a picture
narrow
of his
tunnel
wallet.
vision, at the end of which is a red filter and only things that must die.
Yes, I hear the sounds from Kill Bill playing in the background every time I walk into a tavern. But I think that having these characters that are, or these encounters that are, they've got motivation behind them, they've got reason behind them, and your players, if you lay out the groundwork for these people are antagonists against you for a reason that your players can not only understand, but even empathize with, that you can have a really interesting encounter without even having to make the NPCs all that interesting themselves. Just generic townsfolk that are mad at you because the villain has poisoned them against you.
Also presents the players with an interesting challenge of, do we fight, do we subdue, do we submit to, and see if we can get some information out of them, see if anything can be salvaged out of that kind of situation. It's a very open-ended interpretation to a solution to that actual issue. Because
if you fight them, are you leading directly into the villain's hand and just reinforcing that bad image of yourselves?
Right.
Yeah. I've got some further notes here, and I'm trying to remember. Oh, they're talking about somebody who's familiar. Make familiar style people into antagonists. People. Villains are villains, and you can have just like the big black cape and the horns and the red fiery blah 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 and the goat's feet.
Vader was one of the most prolific villains to ever hit the screen, just because he was just this 6'6", black-clad monstrosity that was just wiping the floor with the quote-unquote good guys.
Yeah, it's a great way to be. That's a real big, obvious villain.
Mm-hmm.
But antagonists that are interesting, they can be somebody that is less. And it can be more interesting that way. I've got written like somebody who's right about things, just like right with quotation marks around it,
Mm-hmm.
and they lord that over everybody. That's a jerk. It's a know-it-all jerk, and we've all worked with them or lived with them or just like am that person most of the time. But anyway, that's a fun antagonist on like a low level. Civil servants who are just trying to get by, or if they've got delusions of grandeur and like are just opposing the player's actions at all points.
Anyone
I mean,
named Susan or Karen?
Yeah, I have that as my next point. It says HR personnel. They think they're the only ones holding back the tide of lawlessness. Cops who follow the rules, religious fanatics. You can have all sorts of fun things that aren't like, these aren't bad people. They've just made bad choices, or they are opposed to the players because of how they were raised or choices that they've made over their life. And they may not be, pure villains, but they're absolutely antagonists for your players.
Yeah, these are all your a lot of NPCs you're going to encounter are going to end up being antagonistic to you, whether it's directly antagonistic to you or just antagonistic to you because that's the level of their personality. And it's just like,
Josh, I know you've read Hitchhiker's Guide. Aaron, have you read Hitchhiker's Guide?
Yes.
You remember the dynamic between Arthur Dent and Slotty Barfart? He was the one character that Arthur just kept accidentally like screwing over or accidentally killing him or whatever in whatever incarnation he happened to be.
Yes, he's the pot of petunia.
He was the pot of petunia that realized, oh no, not again.
Yeah, but that's from Slarty Bartfast's point of view.
Exactly.
Arthur is an antagonist or a villain.
Yeah.
Even though his motivations, his actions are not villainous.
Right. They're just coincidental.
We are all villains in somebody else's story. I just try and be a villain in as many people's stories as possible.
Well, you're trying to be an entertaining villain. You kind of took that kind of page and said, well, if I'm going to be the villain, I'm at least going to be a memorable villain.
He's going to wear a top hat doing it. So
Indeed. And I think that's really what we're talking about when we want to, we want to be better game masters. Mm-hmm. We want to tell better stories. Right. Have memorable characters doing memorable things and give them reasons for doing them that your players can not only understand, but sort of empathize with. Or sympathize with.
For the TPK.
If it's not a challenge, why did we start this thing anyway?
Yeah, no, I agree. You wrote down here at the end, how can you make them into better game situations here? And again, it's all about giving light to your world and kind of flavor to your world. It's not just about having, the very simple quest of go fight the villain. Yeah. it's you're able to now have the ups and downs along the way because you don't want the path to be this flat path. You want it to be riddled with setbacks and other things that are along the way, and you want it to be filled with interesting people as you go along.
Yeah. You've got one of the ones that popped out of my head when I was originally writing some notes down about this was Harry Potter. You've got Dolores Umbridge. Okay. Voldemort is the main villain. He's the bad guy. He is Wizard Hitler, right? But Dolores Umbridge is a terrible human being. We found out later that J.K. Rowling actually identified with this person, but Dolores Umbridge was, Pink Lady. She's just mean. She does terrible things. She's torturing the children. She's just being vicious because she thinks she's right. Okay, these are the sort of memorable characters that will pop up as a good villain, as a good antagonist, because they are memorable. They talk, there was like surveys done about who is a bigger villain in the Harry Potter books, Voldemort or Dolores Umbridge, and people overwhelmingly said Umbridge because she's relatable.
Because it's the relatability. Somebody who's
familiar with, right?
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to say here is that we've all had to deal with, that annoying person from HR that just like takes their job way too seriously and is looking to find a way to screw you over, or that one guy on the highway that just decides he's going to drive slow in front of you and you're not going to get to change lanes, and he's just mad at you and wants to take it out on you, and everybody else is fine. And like, that is the sort of antagonist with the sort of motivations that your party can not only get behind, but be like, yeah, I hate this person, but I understand why.
Exactly. Do you have any other thoughts, Ken? Anything else you want to add to this?
Just a quick 3-person poll. What are your opinions on protagonists who exhibit villainous behavior? Murder hobo conversation aside, because I know that's a completely different.
Like players who do evil things, like
think of it more like another like NPC that is supposed to be a protagonist that is exhibiting villainous behavior. Think like Light Yagami from Death Note. Someone who has.
You haven't seen Death Note?
No, Aaron.
Yeah, so they'd be like another hero who's also portraying villainous behavior.
Right. He's
story.
Even
they're separate from your actual protagonist, which are your players, but they are a hero or a heroic figure who's also portraying villains.
That your players or the main characters have direct evidence or have directly witnessed them exhibiting villainous behavior. Killing someone in an interrogation or bribing a city official.
Yeah, I think that those are, again, it's hard because you've labeled the character a hero. So now are they a hero or a villain? That's up to your players to decide. Really kind of up to you to decide how you want them to, their arc to sort of be. But the antagonistic nature of that is that the depending on what group of players you have, so if they're heroic players and they witness this other hero, murder someone for no good reason, they just murder straight up somebody. Now that is an antagonistic situation because you have a conundrum within your players morally to say, okay, do we just ignore this or do we confront this other hero who might be a villain? Maybe you've always wanted him to be a villain. It's part of your arc for the person as well. But that situation is an antagonistic situation in and of itself, which is it goes against everything that your players are. It's there to it. In that case, it's not a person directly antagonizing you, it's you antagonizing the player. You are the antagonist.
Yeah.
As a storyteller, I am always antagonizing the player.
I think that there is a good history defines us as either heroes or villains. And so if you wanted to make a character who believes in the end justifies the means, and they are agreeing with the players in terms of this needs to happen, but they don't necessarily agree with the players in the actions the players are willing to take to get to that point. They're willing to take it further. They're willing to do things their players are not willing to do. And that is a very interesting character who is not a villain with big quote marks around them because they are opposed to the same bad guy that you are. They are, they're not antagonistic to you because they're agreeing with where you're going. They're trying to help the party, but they're doing it in a way that is morally reprehensible. They're willing to go and bomb the orphanage because there was asbestos and you're trying to clear all the asbestos out of the city.
That's
I
the
don't
reason
know.
they bombed the orphanage.
So first thing that popped in my head. But like
only because you play a warlock. You're always out for them kids.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that, that could be a very interesting character. I don't know. That becomes antagonistic if the players decide to make it that way.
Yeah.
And
a very important distinction is that it really depends on your players and their motivations. Because a lot of the times we are going to have players that are just in and of themselves on completely different ends of the morality spectrum.
Yeah, and I think that is very interesting for role play, for storytelling, that gives your players, once again, the choice on how they want to proceed with that story, how they want to deal with things. Giving your players options and providing them with interesting choices is the best thing you can do as a game master, as a storyteller. Otherwise, you're just, roller coastering them through your magical land of this is my story and you're going to stick to it.
Yeah, that's not role playing. That's a tour.
I mean, it's fun.
Oh yeah, I didn't say it's not fun. But...
Anyway, I like the idea, and you can definitely use the same sort of ideas that we've talked about here today to flesh that out.
Yeah. So, I think that's going to wrap us up here for the episode. Unless anybody else has any other thoughts, but I'm gonna go ahead and take it here and say nope. Nobody else has any other thoughts, so we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up for the episode. If you have thoughts on antagonists versus villains, if you agree with anything, maybe you totally disagree with my take that a villain has to end up becoming an antagonist. Prove me wrong. levelupyourgaming.podcast@gmail.com or facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. Also, the podcast is on YouTube, so smash the like button there, subscribe to it, subscribe on your favorite podcast site, review it, recommend it to a friend, your gaming group, maybe your antagonist or villain that you know in real life. And that all wraps up for the week. So for Josh, Ken, I'm Aaron. Have a good week, everyone.
Bye.